D.L. Moody once said, "A holy life will make the deepest impression." Lighthouses blow no horns, they just shine. While Moody was right in saying that holiness is often noticed, it's also true that holiness is not always appreciated. Our sin-filled societies can't understand and often don't appreciate our countercultural lifestyle. And sometimes they respond by lashing out at God's people. There are times when our God-honoring choices can make our life more difficult. When that happens, you may find yourself asking, if holiness makes life harder, who needs it? What's the good of godliness? You're not the only person who's asked that question. I think Joseph did as well. So listen in to Kent, Nathan, and Vicki as they discover the answer by looking at the life of Joseph. Welcome to CrossTalk, a Christian podcast whose goal is for us to encourage each other, to not only increase our knowledge of the Bible, but to take the next step beyond information into transformation. Our goal is to bring the Bible to life, into all of our lives. I'm Brian French. Today, Dr. Kent Edwards, Vicki Hitzges, and Nathan Norman continue their discussion through the book of Genesis. And if you have a Bible handy, turn to Genesis chapters 39 to chapters 41, verse 52, as we join their discussion.
Nathan, Vicki, do you have investments by any chance?
Yeah.
I've got a small little investment through my denomination, and I've invested in my children.
Oh, that's a good answer.
They are our future, after all.
Yeah, good answer. Very sweet.
For you guys listening at home, Vicki called me sweet one time, and now Kent is using it mockingly.
I was sincere.
Yes, Vicki's always sincere.
Would I be sarcastic? It doesn't sound like me.
Never.
No.
But seriously, if you have to make a choice in what to invest in, how do you make that? I mean, big amount, small amount, you still have to make a decision. What are you going to invest in? What are you not? What criteria do you use?
Well, I would like to pretend that I know, and I know what's going to go up. And that's what I use. In real life, when I make the decision, it always goes down. So I hand it over to Al Dogger at UBS, put in a plug-in for him because he can make it go up.
Yeah.
But that is what you want to look for. You want to look for something that's healthy, that people are going to believe in, buy, and the stock's going to go up.
Yeah, the more stable of an investment, the more I'm willing to invest. The more risky, the less I'm willing to invest.
That's interesting. As I did a little bit of research on the subject, different investment advisors had different lists, but three seemed to rise to the surface. They said, look for an investment that is safe. That's what you mentioned, Nathan. Has a predictable outcome or guaranteed return. I think that's what you were looking at, Vicki.
That's what you want.
Thirdly, they said easy to buy or sell. So if you want to get out of it, you can get out of it in a timely manner. When I think of that, I think, well, in a sense, our decision to follow Christ is also an investment of our life. Is that actually a good investment? I mean, does it always pay off? Let's use those three factors and see if they apply spiritually. Is it a safe decision to commit your life to Christ?
Well, in the long
That's
run,
an interesting question. Go ahead, Nathan.
Oh, yeah. I mean, in the long run, yes. But in the short term, Jesus said, no servant is greater than his master. If they hated me, they'll hate you also. So short term, no.
Okay. Will that decision bring a predictable outcome or guaranteed return?
Well, to echo Nathan, who I always want to imitate, in the long run, yeah, but in the short run, no.
Right. And is it easy to buy or sell? Is it easy to get in or out of?
I guess that depends on how you look at it. It was easy for me to get into. It's easy for me to stay in. To get out of, it would be hard for me to get out of it because I'm very committed to it. I see others fall away from it, if that's what you mean.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I committed to Christ when I was young, before I realized that I was committing to chastity as well, to be faithful to Him as a teenager. But yeah, no, that's a hard question because, like Vicki said, it's like I don't want to get out of it, but there are people that want to. But theologically, you know, if I belong to Him, I belong to Him, right? And I can wander away, but Still his child.
Well, it's just interesting. Is it a safe decision? I remember, just to echo you, Nathan, as I always want to do.
That's what happens with sweet people.
When I went up publicly in front of the high school as I was leading the InterVarsity group and announced at our multiple school meetings that I was leader of the group and invited people to attend, it was not necessarily a safe decision. I began to get backlash from people who resented the fact that we were a Christian group operating in a secular school. It didn't have guaranteed immediate return. Long-term, of course. But short-term, and it made it hard to get out of because everyone was watching me. I became the Christian representative, as it will, whether I liked it or not. And so everything I did and said was scrutinized. Jesus tells us, don't look for quick, immediate, this-world return on our investment of following him. When in the Sermon on the Mount, he said, blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness. People will insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me, in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. Even though, if you live a beatitude life, you're an exceptional citizen and person and neighbor and friend, yet because you're following Christ, you can expect to have those difficulties, that persecution. We saw that lived out in Joseph's life last week in Genesis chapter 37. I mean, as we mentioned, all stories have tension and conflict in them that increase as the story progresses. And time after time in that chapter, Joseph kept making God-honoring decisions. And every time, his holiness led him into hot water until the chapter ended with Joseph sold into slavery and his father thinking he was dead. That's not a good ending for all those good choices.
No.
Yeah. So if he thought life couldn't get worse, he was wrong. In fact, as the story continues in chapter 39, we read how bad it became for him. Vicki, would you just set the context for us there in verses 1 through 6?
Sure. It says, Potiphar, an Egyptian who was one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard, bought him. The Lord is with Joseph. When his master saw that the Lord was with him and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did, Joseph found favor in his eyes, and Potiphar put him in charge of his household, and he entrusted to his care everything he owned. So Potiphar left everything he had in Joseph's care.
Okay. So in this scene, is Joseph a good guy or a bad guy?
He's a good guy. He has the Lord's favor, and Potiphar completely trusts him and puts him in charge of every single thing he has.
Which is incredible. Even as a slave, he chooses to be the best of the best, right?
Yeah. I mean, if there was ever a time when you could be resentful and undermining and passive-aggressive, this would be a time where he could do that. And
Right.
clearly he wasn't.
Yeah.
He was honoring his God in the workplace, no question. So what do you expect should happen?
God should reward him.
Of course, God blesses the righteous, right? Except in this case, that didn't quite happen. Nathan, what did happen to him?
Verse 7, his master's wife took notice of Joseph and said, come to bed with me. So he's about to be rewarded.
So much for
So
the
that can be edited,
sweetness.
right? I'm just-
No, so she spoke to Joseph day after day. One day he went into the house to attend to his duties, and none of the household servants was inside. She caught him by his cloak and said, come to bed with me. But he left his cloak in her hand and ran out of the house.
Wow. Okay. So why didn't he sleep with her? I mean, what was his reason for that?
Well, it was wrong. Fornication, first of all. Adultery, on the other hand.
Okay. And he's very clear that it would have been a sin against his God as well against his master. Joseph, good guy, bad guy?
Well, he's a good guy.
Right. I mean, isn't this one of the most exemplary moral decisions you've ever seen in the Bible?
Well, yeah. I
Yeah,
mean,
no question.
no one would have ever found out. No one would ever know.
Would his church find out?
Nope, there's no church.
No. Would his family find out?
Nope, they
They're
think he's
gone.
dead or hope he's dead.
Right. How old is he?
Grown.
Yeah, he's a young man. So he's in his 20s.
Right. So he's a strapping man, right? Because it says that Joseph was well-built and handsome. So he had shoulders and biceps and probably an 8-pack.
So he could grate cheese on his abs and...
That's what Potiphar's wife said. Come, let me grate cheese on your abs. That's what the kids are calling it these days, those millennials.
So he had every reason in the world to do that, because if he got Potiphar's wife angry at him, she could really hurt him.
Right.
So the smart decision probably would have been to have the affair. Keep the wife happy. Sex is not altogether unpleasant, so there's that benefit. No one will find out. There's really almost no downside. And by the way, I get this sense that his boss really wasn't paying much attention to what was going on in the household. In fact, with Joseph there, the text tells us that he concerned himself with nothing except the food he ate. So he was a foodie, and Potiphar's wife took notice of this young, strapping young man, and he had every reason in the world to sleep with her, and he did not. So what should you expect should happen? How should God respond?
Reward him.
Absolutely. And what happens?
He gets punished.
She falsely accuses him of rape, and Potiphar sends him to prison. Now, what's fascinating to me is that he got sent to prison. In that culture at that time, what would you expect to happen if a slave slept with his owner's wife?
Executed.
Instantly. There would be absolutely no question. So why do you think Potiphar didn't execute him? I think because this is not the first time his wife has been unfaithful. I mean, you don't go from perfect purity to chasing a slave around the house. There's a lot of steps in between that. But he knew he had to do something to protect his honor. And so because I think he believed that Joseph was innocent, he compromised, didn't kill him, just sent him to prison. The only worse thing than being sent to prison is knowing that you are being sent there for something you did not do wrong. And now he's in prison. So, what happens when he's in prison? How does he behave? In verse 21 and following?
It says, while Joseph was in prison, the Lord was with him. So the warden put Joseph in charge of all those held in prison. And he was made responsible for all that was done there. The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. That is a wow.
Joseph. Good guy, bad guy.
Great guy.
Amazing. I mean, it's one thing when you're a slave to rise to the occasion and just do the best you can to honor the Lord with your work. But in prison? I mean, I'm no expert in prison life, but from what I see on TV, it seems to be every person for themselves. That's where selfishness is rampant. But Joseph gave himself to look after the prison, to try and make life better for everyone. He was even concerned about the psychological welfare of his fellow prisoners. Do you remember that? There were two particular prisoners who were upset in the night because they had had dreams. And Joseph decided he was going to help them understand them. And he did. He listened to the dream of the baker and said, yeah, unfortunately, it's not going to end well for you. The dream says that you are going to lose your life here in prison. And the cupbearer came and shared his dream. And he said, no, for you, you're going to be restored. You're going to go back and you're going to serve Pharaoh again. And he was. Not only was he concerned about the psychological well-being of other people, he didn't even want to be paid for it. He didn't ask to barter his services for chocolate bars or toothpaste or anything else that might be used in prison. Instead, all he said was, remember me to Pharaoh when you're back. That's it. What happened?
He was forgotten. The chief cupbearer, however, did not remember Joseph. He forgot him.
Isn't that amazing? How could you forget?
For 2 years.
Yeah. 2 full years, it tells us.
I'm going to read that cynically, though. Like, he forgot. I'm using scare quotes here, everyone. Like he just, I'm out, consequences are over, la-di-da. I don't have to remember everything, and I don't have to risk making Pharaoh angry, right? He was angry at me for one thing and threw me into prison. So, hey, there's this guy I met in prison that maybe you could get him out. Like, no, I don't want to go back there. That wasn't fun.
So just think about it from Joseph's perspective. I mean, look at his career path. He started off as the favorite son of Jacob, a well-respected businessman, right? And then, because of godliness, what happened to him?
He was made a slave. His brother sold him into slavery.
Right, that's not upward mobility. And then he became a prisoner in charge of other prisoners. And now, what is he? A forgotten prisoner. I mean, all these godly decisions he's making. He's living an exemplary moral life, expecting, as anyone would, that God would honor them. And yet life gets worse and worse and worse. I mean, I think he's asking himself, what's the good of godliness? Have you ever known people who have asked that question?
I've asked that. When I was growing up, I grew up in a very godly, good home, loved my family, loved my faith, but it didn't work well for me. My friends did not grow up in Christian homes. They were not believers. And when I was 12, they started to smoke cigarettes and drink cough syrup because of the alcohol in it. And I was very uncomfortable around them. And I went from being a leader to being a girl that just did not fit in. And so they quit inviting me to parties. And real long story short, I ended up not having any friends from the time I was 12 until the time I graduated from high school. And in fact, I skipped my senior year because I did not have any friends. And I was miserable. And if I had children today, I don't know how well I would parent because I did not know how to handle that.
Yeah, I can't imagine.
Sometimes the best decisions, the most godly decisions, the decisions for holiness that we make, can sometimes make our life worse. It's true for us. It was true for Joseph. And in chapter 41, it gets even worse for Joseph. The tension certainly increases. In fact, there, Pharaoh had a dream. You may remember. He had this dream about 7 fat cows and then 7 starving cows, each of them by the river. And he asked his magicians to interpret the dream. And it didn't work so well. They had no answers for him. Pharaoh got frustrated. And it was then that, the cupbearer got his memory back. Didn't he, Vicki?
This is such an interesting, I love this story in the Bible. The cupbearer said to Pharaoh, "Today I'm reminded of my shortcomings." And Pharaoh was once angry. And he imprisoned me in the chief baker. And each of us had a dream the same night. And each dream had a meaning of its own. And a young Hebrew was there with us. And he interpreted our dreams for us. And things turned out exactly as he interpreted them for us. I was restored to my position, and the other man was impaled.
So, having learned about this young Hebrew, what did Pharaoh do?
Pharaoh sent for Joseph, and he was quickly brought from the dungeons. When he had shaved and changed his clothes, he came before Pharaoh.
Now, I'm fascinated by that little detail. I mean, why would the narrator stop and tell us that he had to be shaved and have his clothes changed before he could come before Pharaoh?
He was living in squalor, and he had never trimmed anything, and so he was probably a incredibly hairy person. And at this time, the Egyptians, they thought of the Hebrew people as just these hairy people, and they didn't like any kind of body hair whatsoever, the Egyptians. So the Hebrews were in sharp contrast, and Joseph probably had like a cool beard going on that was down to his knees because he'd been forgotten for so long.
Right. So culturally, he didn't fit in, but I think, as you said, I think he was living like in a sewer. I mean, these are not modern prisons. They did not have running water and modern plumbing.
Yeah.
I think he stunk. So tell me, if you've been forgotten and unjustly imprisoned, and you live in that kind of condition, and you have the opportunity to come before Pharaoh, I mean, what do you think your motivation is going to be to say or do anything to get out of prison?
I just want to get out of prison. I will do anything. I will say anything. Just let me out of this.
Right. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, we read in verse 15, "I had a dream and no one can interpret it." but I've heard of it said that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. What a setup, right? I mean, this is his expertise. This is what he's done since he's a kid. He's always been able to interpret dreams. This is his thing. Now, before we get to his answer, though, Nathan, who did this Pharaoh guy think he was? Tell me about his self-image.
He thought he was God incarnate. He was one of the gods incarnate on the earth, and when he died, he would be entombed and rule from the heavens as one of the gods of the pantheon.
So this guy literally thought he was God.
Right. We've all had bad bosses that acted like they thought they were God, but this one took it an extra step.
And this is the only person that could get him out of prison, right?
Right.
I mean, there was no court of appeal. There was no judicial system. He was the law, and he thought he was God. And he says, I want you to tell me what the interpretation of my dream is. And in verse 16, Vicki, what does he say?
I can't do it. But God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires.
That is the ultimate time when I would compromise. That's when I'd say, I'll sing or dance. I'll do anything I have to do. I'll say anything. Just let me out of prison. And here is Joseph, who has constantly made God-honoring decisions, and life has always been getting worse and worse when he does. And he says, even at the time of most temptation, of greatest stress, when the conflict is the greatest, he looks this man in the eye and he says, you're not God. God is God. And he will give you the answer. What do you expect will happen?
Off with his head. Impale him like the baker.
Absolutely. I don't know what the baker did, but it was not as bad as this. We expect instantly he will die. And instead, Pharaoh says what? Oh, okay.
Well, he had to know he didn't know. I mean, somewhere Joseph's getting this information. Anyway, he wanted to know. Pharaoh wanted to know.
Yeah.
Right. But by insulting the king, the king that badly, that would automatically be result in death.
How come you guys are so sure Pharaoh thought he was God?
It doesn't mention it in the text, but historically, that's what pharaohs thought that they were. That's why we have all of the pyramids, and they're entombed, and the said curses if you go into the tomb, because they were considered in their theology back then as enthroned deities entombed to rule over us.
Oh, that's interesting.
When I was in India, the Mongols ruled in northern India, well, across the whole region for centuries. But across from the Taj Mahal was their fort, and that was the main center where they ruled. And there was a massive courtyard, where the king of the Mughals would sit on the peacock throne and render verdicts and give edicts and so on. If you turned your back on the king to walk out of that mile-wide courtyard, the guards would instantly kill you.
Oh my goodness.
It was an insult.
Wow.
You just simply, you had to go out backwards the entire way to show respect. You never turned your back on the king. So given that kind of a context, when you see Joseph saying, you're not God, my God is God, I mean, that would be instant torture and death. I mean, there's absolutely no question.
And then Pharaoh's verbal response to Joseph. He says, since God has made all this known to you, there's no one as discerning and wise as you. That's pretty amazing for him to say. He says, you will be in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you.
That's impossible, but yet it happened.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yes.
He recognized when Joseph told him that vision, what the dream meant, that there was something more important, more better, more higher than him. And that Joseph was blessed by God.
Do you think God may have been involved in this sudden turn of events?
Yeah.
Most certainly.
You're not God. Okay. This is what's going to happen. 7 good years, 7 lean years. That's interesting. How'd you like to be in charge of running my nation for those 14 years and beyond. Oh, okay. Let me check my schedule, see if I'm free. When do you want me to start? And then, as the story ends, he's paraded through town. He is honored. He is glorified. What just happened to Joseph's career path? Well, in verse 41 to 43, it's your favorite story, Vicki. You read it for us. At 30 years of age, Pharaoh said to
30
Joseph,
years of age, I hereby put you in charge of the whole land of Egypt. And then Pharaoh took his signet ring from his finger and put it on Joseph's finger. He dressed him in robes of fine linen and put a gold chain around his neck. He had him ride in a chariot, a second in command, and people shouted before him, "Make way!" Thus he put him in charge of the whole land of Egypt.
I mean, look at that career path. Every time he was making a godly decision, life got worse and worse and worse and worse. If there ever was a time that you would want to stop making those kind of decisions, it would have been right there standing before Pharaoh. But when he said, in essence, I would rather die than deny my God, I will live a holy life regardless of the consequences. What did God do? God ultimately honored him beyond his wildest dreams. And I think what happened to Joseph happens to us today. I'm not saying we're all going to become princes of Egypt. That's not what I'm saying. And I'm not saying necessarily that turnaround that Joseph experienced, we will experience in this life. Sometimes it may not be until the life to come, until eternity. But I would say that God always honors those who honor him. And when you make an investment in God, it's not for the short term, it's for the long term. Because in the long term, it always pays off. So let me just encourage our listeners and ourselves. When we make godly decisions and it makes life worse, it doesn't mean we've made a mistake. Let me also point out what would happen if Joseph had stopped making God-honoring decisions along that journey. If at any point he had said, you know what, I'm going to be better off if I just sleep with the boss's wife, he would never have enjoyed all that God wanted him to have. If he had rebelled in prison, if he had not made the God-honoring choices there that he did, he might not have enjoyed all that God had for him later. God always honors those who honor him. What happens when God's people consistently make God-honoring decisions, regardless of the personal consequences? They will be honored, ultimately, by God. So what's the good of godliness? When we choose to honor God, regardless of the consequences, we will never be sorry. God is no man's debtor, and holiness is the best investment you can make. It was for Joseph, and it will be for you.
Why should we act in a godly fashion, even if it's hard? Because when we honor God, regardless of the consequences, in the long term, somehow God will honor us. Our godliness will pay off. Godliness is always a great investment. I trust that today's discussion of God's Word has been helpful and served as an encouragement to not just be hearers of the Word, but doers. Together, let's bring God's Word to life, to our lives this week. The CrossTalk podcast is a production of CrossTalk Global, equipping biblical communicators so every culture hears God's voice. To find out more about this educational, nonprofit organization, please visit www.crosstalkglobal.org. You can also support this show by rating it on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're enjoying it. Be sure to listen next Friday as we continue our discussion of the book of Genesis and discover how God often restores the moral character of our loved ones who've gone astray. You won't want to miss it.